Joining us. Today, we're back with another Mission Essential conversation. We're excited to bring you 2+3, Great Power Competition, a conversation with General Tony Thomas as interviewed by Major General Clay Hutmacher. The U.S. strategy orientation, often referred to as 2+3, is the strategy for countering two primary challenges, Russia and China, and three additional ones, North Korea, Iran, and violent extreme organizations. Today, the United States and China, often with Russia at its side, are competing to shape security architectures as well as norms and practices worldwide, including trade and investment regimes and the development and regulation of new technologies and infrastructures. These frictions will play out over decades, not only in Beijing and Washington and Moscow, but in Africa and Europe, in the Arctic, cyberspace, and even outer space. Power competition is a key component of global security today. The type and diversity of threats demand ongoing vigilance and understanding. Enhancing our tactical level, cultural understanding, and human expertise has long been our focus at Mission Essential. And as I always like to remind you all, for some context, Mission Essential is the largest provider of language services to DoD. We've completed over 100,000 missions with 20,000 linguists in 83 countries. Specific to SOCOM, we currently have 400 personnel in theater, and our services include linguistic, cultural, and intelligence analysis. We hope this conversation will inform and inspire you. I'm honored to once again introduce Major General Clay Hutmacher, who served 40 years in uniform. His last assignment was Director of Operations in the U.S. Special Operations Command, Tampa. He also led the MH-60 Direct Action Penetrator Platoon Leader for Delta Company. Major General Hutmacher became the President and Chief Executive of the Special Operations Warrior Foundation in September 2018, where he is today. We are, of course, also privileged to have General Tony Thomas with us once again, and I'll let Major General Clay Hutmacher introduce him further. Welcome back to you both, and thank you again for being with us today. Thank you for your service and sacrifice. Major General, the con is yours.
Hey, it's my pleasure to introduce General Retired Tony Thomas, the 11th Commander of US Special Operations Command. General Thomas and I have served together for many years. A graduate of West Point, he commanded at every level in the Special Ops community to include the Joint Special Operations Command and the US Special Operations Command before he retired last year. Since he's retired, General Thomas serves as a partner with Lux Capital, and important and close to my heart is he is also the chairman of the board of the Special Operations Warrior Foundation and has done a great job providing strategic leadership to our organization. And sir, welcome, and we're glad to have you here this morning.
Clay, great to be here with you, and thanks as well to the Mission Essential team for this opportunity to talk about this very profound subject.
Hey, thanks, sir. So I'll dive right in. We're going to talk, about our strategic threats against the United States. We'll start out with what I believe is certainly the most significant, but want to get your thoughts is China. Can you give us an overview of China and how significant of a threat is it to the United States?
Yeah, Clay, two things before we get started that I'd like to get out of the way as Brian introduced us. And first of all, and most importantly, my answers to your questions are my opinions. They don't represent SOCOM, DOD, or some cabal of retired general officers. It's just my thoughts on a subject. So I welcome any challenges to my opinions. Secondly, we're going to talk about 5 specific threats today. But I can't emphasize enough the fact that they are global threats and they are interrelated. So they're not 5 separate and distinct. You can silo them and approach them, in their own way, shape, or form. This is a grand game of risk. It's not a game that we're involved in right now. Arguably, the most strategically challenging moment in my lifetime, if not, in the history of our country, going forward. So, just want to put that in context. You are right, and I agree with you in terms of listing China as the preeminent threat for us. And I have difficulty keeping up with the amount of information that comes out every day about the threat to China, our approach to China. Most recently, Council for Foreign Relations put out a piece that I found to be a little bit of an oxymoron, that we should play a harder line to China vis-a-vis Taiwan, but somehow still maintain a one China policy. To me, it's not consistent. In fact, we're trying to we're trying to be too clever by half. But that's the kind of challenge that people have now in terms of, okay, we've identified them as an adversary. How are we going to deal with them? I would commend to the audience two sources of information that I actually went back on yesterday to prepare that I just find incredibly insightful. One is Graham Allison's "Destined for War: Can America and China Escape the Thucydides Trap?" And if nothing else, if you kind of embrace the rest of Allison's theory, the first couple chapters that talk about the irresistible nature of China, just the evolution of China, will knock your socks down. It's an amazing evolution that arguably we've underpinned, we've enabled, and now we're regretting the fact that that China has had this dominant economic evolution, but we're partly to blame. The other one, interestingly, is through the eyes of the economist, and I think you heard me say this to some of our visitors at SOCOM, that the economist just in the last 5-6 years has gone from disparaging China, and I won't forget the term they used in a disparaging fashion, of state-sponsored capitalism, kind of an oxymoron itself, state-sponsored capitalism, but in the intent to imply that it's stunted, it defies initiative, et cetera, to just last year, or maybe a little over a year ago, where the banner headline in The Economist was "How the West Got China Wrong." And to me, it's an example of how we have wished away the problem of China up to this point, and now it is very much in our grill, and something that we're challenged to do something about. The last comment I'll leave with you, and it's kind of humorous, but in Allison's book, it starts off with a famous Napoleon quote, and this is 1817, mind you. And according to the book, it says Napoleon commented, "Let China sleep. When she wakes, she will shake the world." And I think we're seeing that play out in spades right now.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Absolutely. Can you what do you believe? And I appreciate your caveat that this is your opinion. And what do you believe are China's strategic goals? I mean, is it world dominance? Is it what do you believe are their goals?
Great question, and unfortunately, I find it frustrating. They've actually been very specific about what their goals are. They've pushed out some very detailed products. It's only a lot of reading if you do it, but they've outlined where they think they should be, what their grievances are, and I think that's probably the first and most important point that we as Westerners don't appreciate. The Chinese, not as at an individual level because they're not that old individually, but as from a national animus, talk about 100 years of shame. And you go back to the 1800s and up till now, and the Chinese contend that they've been dealt a bad hand by a bunch of imperial powers, and were essentially taken from a great power status and restricted to what they kind of woke up to realize that they were in the late 1900s. Their goals, as I mentioned, are pretty specific. They're anchored on a pivotal date. 2049 is the 100-year anniversary of the Communist Party, and they use that as kind of an anchor point. By then, we expect to be with specific goals. It's very personal, and I think that's important as well. That Xi Jinping internalizes this plan. He's the author of this plan, and he's in my mind just a fascinating case study in itself on what we're dealing with. Here's a guy whose father was imprisoned, who was sent to go live in a cave for literally for a while, was impoverished. I mean, really living at a very basic level. And according to the biographers, decided I'm going to be redder than red. And so he took a very harsh approach to climb through the Communist Party system to where he is now. The specific goals in his quote unquote dream, the China dream, is that China becomes a rich, powerful, respected nation, that they undo 100 years of shame, that they return to prominence, and that they rectify what they call territorial challenges in terms of Greater China. And you can see that in the East China Sea, South China Sea efforts to date. So again, a very specific plan. It's out there. It's for all to see. They're not being very subtle about it, especially how they apply economic levers and others. But they're moving out.
So do you see similarities in their strategy to to Sun Tzu and his approach? My personal opinion is I see a lot of similarities there, but I'd like to get your thoughts on that.
I think Sun Tzu probably is more. I give him credit for being more subtle and maybe more patient. And then they might say that was his fault, that they've been too patient and that they accepted setbacks in the interest of furthering their goals. So I think it's certainly integrated and embedded in the approach. I don't know if I would chalk it up to a Confucian approach or whatever. I'm not that expert in it, but I think they're a little more overt in terms of their approach than that.
Mm. What would you say are China's strengths? I mean, what do they bring to the fight that we don't?
Yeah, at the risk of sounding like a political campaign, I think that the duh answer is it's the economy, stupid. Their economy is, as I mentioned earlier, irresistible. And again, Allison goes into very specific details, but like it or not, they have or will eclipse us in almost every measure, us being the US as an individual competitor. But their economy is the bludgeon that they're applying around the world right now to great effect. They are buying out countries. They are leveraging governments through their economic lever, like we have not seen by another major power in the past, at least recently.
Mm. How about vulnerabilities? I mean, if we go with the strengths, and obviously it's their economy, which is quite the juggernaut, as you articulated, but surely they have some vulnerabilities in areas that we can exploit and use against them and us and our allies.
Yeah, interestingly, I think again, I would answer the economy. They have created this juggernaut. It might surprise people, and I've been part of conversations lately where, hey, we're too dependent on them for microelectronics and other things. We got to pull them back to home. Reality is the Chinese now are less dependent on exports. They went into a big export binge. I think they had about 150% advantage on us. Now they're only about 18% reliant on exports. So it's its own kind of sustainable economy, but to a point. They've got to create, I think, 2 million jobs a year for their middle class to keep them going. And so how they sustain this thing in the face of tariffs and other pressures that are being put on them will be kind of a telling point going forward, because that's the government stands hard on look what we've done for you, look how we've enhanced your human existence, much less your human rights is more than your human existence. Tied to that too is the information piece, and you and I spoke before about the importance of competing in the information space. China has gone to great pains, draconian pains, to close down open sources of information coming into their burgeoning 1.5 billion people, because they don't want them to know what's really going on the outside, what the perception of them is on the outside. They want to control that, towards party goals. So I'd say the economy and the information space are probably in my mind, their biggest vulnerabilities.
Hey, thanks, sir. I appreciate that. So based on these 2 points, our discussion on vulnerabilities and strengths, how do we compete with China? How do we deter them? I mean, how do we approach them?
Yeah, I think it's the going in position, which may or may not be very popular lately, is we can't do it by ourselves. Again, just the demographics, and I'm not, in almost every war game I've ever participated in acknowledges that the Chinese don't want to go toe to toe with us militarily. I don't think they do. I think at a point in time, they might think that they can handle it regionally or locally. But the bottom line is they don't want to, press that, antagonize this in a military fashion. But for across the elements of power, we have got to do this with allies and partners. Now, I say that not just with a big hand wave. I say that because that's the very opportunity that presents itself right now. Specifically, India. In my lifetime, as you and I served, for 40 years, for the first 30 years, we could never talk about India as a strategic partner. I can remember Mattis briefing Trump on an occasion, and the president kind of blew it off completely, saying there was no opportunity there because they, quote, buy all Russian junk. And Mattis corrected him at the time and said, oh no, Mr. President, they used to buy all Russian junk. They now buy 70% Russian junk, and they're buying American. And as we know, they desperately want to get the great hardware that we can produce. But India, again, you would not have had that discussion 10, 15 years ago. There just was no opportunity there. It is soon to be the most populous country in the world, a natural adversary for China, and we should be thinking of all sorts of clever ways to leverage that as part of the block that we need to put together to create the balance, to have the balance of power that we want in the Pacific. I think you could include Korea, Japan, certainly the Aussies and New Zealanders going in, but they'll tell you, as you and I have dealt with them, hey, we're with you, ideologically, as we always have been, but economically, it's really, really hard if you don't weigh in the Pacific and help us out here, because China will hold us over the barrel. Maybe potential in Indonesia and Malaysia, the Philippines. I think, again, natural adversaries in terms of territorial disputes and all. So again, real opportunity there, but we need to stitch that all together in some sort of coherent approach.
Hey, sir, thanks very much. Now, I know, I guess you were talking there in competing with them using our partners and allies economically and militarily. Do you have any additional thoughts on how we compete with them militarily? Obviously they've created they've militarized really several shoals and built power projection platforms and bases, which present many challenges for our Navy to have access there. Any thoughts on competing with them militarily? Is it a fool's errand to try to engage with them and in their backyard inside the second and third island chain?
You must have seen my notes, Clay, because that was my first comment. Is this a fool's errand? We obviously, I think it's our national interest to be able to exercise freedom of navigation through the East China Sea, South China Sea, and that's really the gist of, before it gets emotional, before it gets militant, what I think our interests are vis-a-vis what they think are their territorial rights. But the thought of us fighting into the South China Sea or East China Sea, I would poke in terms of, okay, be careful. It's almost like a dog chasing an ambulance. You get that bumper. What are you going to do with it? You go into the South China Sea, you're not going to own that. You're not going to own and operate it in terms of occupying. So what do you really think? The military objective, supporting our strategic goals might be. The other point too, and this is again a little point of frustration for me. To follow that logic, folks then naturally think, well, it's a Navy problem. This is so much bigger than a Navy problem. But if you just wanted to pull the string on the Navy problem, you could say, okay, good. So what are our forces available? Carrier, battle groups, et cetera, to go in there and do our business. What do they have? An asymmetric response in the form of over 1,000 anti-ship missiles of various types that I think more than levels the table. I wouldn't want one of my kids, much like we did under the Clinton administration, sailing into the Strait of Taiwan there to say, hey, because we are doing this. That bruised the Chinese back then, and they have absolutely come up with a response for that in terms of you put that 5,000 person ship into the Strait of Taiwan again. I've got all sorts of DF-21s that I can pickle off in your direction. So again, how do we pursue our national interests relative to them clamping down on their territorial aspirations? Some of this is being resolved in courts of law. Certainly some of the Philippine areas are, but right now it's a little bit of not a little bit, a lot of brinksmanship. I think we just pushed 2 carriers through there not too long ago, and the Chinese are certainly responding with, I see you and I raise you in terms of my military capability, and I hope you don't wake up some morning and find out it's a shooting war.
No, thanks, sir. Before we move on to Russia, I did have one follow-up question with that. So if we take the assumption, go on the assumption that pushing into their backyard in the straits near Taiwan and inside the second, third island chain is not advisable based on their anti-ship capability, How about, should we be consider competing with them in some non-core interests, Africa, South America, other places where we can compete with them and sort of swap the tables on them? Now they have to, they have long lines of communication. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I absolutely think we should be looking again at them as a global challenge. And I have actually offered this to a few folks who get flummoxed that where do you start? Where do we start to compete with China? I flippantly kind of said, hey, how about mirror image? Just acknowledge what they're doing, and then determine what are we doing in response. Is there any response that we have that's comparable to it? If not, mirror image it. Try and do some of what they're doing as kind of an immediate pushback. Right now, they have most favored trading partner status in 130 countries. They are playing a really, really strong, economic hand. Our approach is myopic, even from a DoD standpoint. So my prism on all this, as I'd go to 4-star sessions, was, hey, we're gonna talk about how we're countering China today, and our lead for DoD is Indo-PACOM. That's the problem. Indo-PACOM is a Hawaii, great command, a Hawaii-based command with an aperture looking at them from the South China Sea, East China Sea optic, and not looking at them globally. And so we're not coherent. We're playing a 6-man zone against a global competitor, 6-man across our regional GCC construct, and we're not coherent. I think you and I both saw that when folks realized that, hey, you need to talk China if you want resources from the department, every one of the GCCs, to include AFRICOM, said, hey, I have China in my backyard too, whether it's Djibouti or wherever it might be. And they tried to play a hand that would get them resourcing to counter China, but it didn't constitute a global response to China. So, yes, we need to compete. We need to pick it up to a global level to actually compete and to have any chance of countering their effort right now, which has just been untrammeled for many years now.
Oh, so I couldn't agree more. Once again, the limitations of our current geographic combatant command construct are certainly not working to our advantage when we're dealing with China, especially with your view, and I agree, as a global threat.